Vice Dean Ori, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for giving me such a very clear introduction, so nobody's in any doubt who I am. The last university I went to was 2 Shabbats ago. I went to Manchester University, and I spoke to their Jewish society. And I went in a shirt and tie, 20 years older than everyone else. And I sat down with some of them having their Shabbat meal, and I started talking to them and asking them how they enjoyed Manchester and what they were studying. And then they turned to me and they said, "And what are you studying?" So I'm grateful for the clarity of the introduction. Can I just first introduce those of my team who are here? Yossi Tokaspa at the front, do you want to show yourself, is the Director of Trade and Investment at the Embassy. We have 2 teams at the Embassy dealing with commercial diplomacy. One is Yossi's. Yossi's team does trade promotion, so British exports to Israel, but crucially as well, inward investment to the UK. So any Israeli company, entrepreneur thinking of going to the UK, Yossi and his team are your people. And then we've got, I think, 3 people here from the Tech Hub, which I'm going to come on and explain the role of. We have our digital manager, Lucy. We have our clean tech manager, Yoni, and Alicia, our project manager, who is not only project manager at the Hub, but is also an alum of the Recanati School. Now, you might ask why an ambassador is talking about tech, why an ambassador is obsessed with tech. And it's partly because I knew when I came to Israel that if I spent all day, every day, arguing with people about settlements, then I would very quickly go insane, as several of my predecessors did. And so I needed to find something a little more positive to work on, where I believe that Britain and Israel could really achieve amazing things, not by arguing with each other, but by doing things together. And by finding those positive things, we can make sure that the relationship between the 2 countries isn't the sum of all the things we disagree about, but it's actually also about something very positive that we're doing together. And when Israelis think about Britain and British people think about Israel, they don't just think all the political differences, they think about the amazing things we're doing together in tech. And so increasingly my goal has been, my sort of single-minded focus has been the creation of this tech partnership between the 2 countries. And fundamentally, the offer that the 2 countries make each other on tech, I believe, is very sound. And to take, first of all, what Israel offers the UK, I think it's obvious. And everyone knows now, everyone around the world is getting to know about Israel's tech miracle, about the startup nation, and about Israel as a global source of incredible innovation, of disruptive, market-changing technologies. And so the Israeli offer to the UK is very straightforward, which is, I believe, as the person responsible for promoting British interests here, that if we can get a slice of the action, if we can get a portion of Israeli tech entrepreneurs, tech companies looking to the UK, then you will benefit our economy. I believe that Israeli innovation can be a driver for UK economic growth. And given the situation, the economic situation in the UK and across Europe, growth is our government's top priority above everything else. And so if Israel can contribute to that, then that has to be something amazingly worthwhile for me and my team to achieve. But I believe the British offer to Israel is also compelling. It might be less obvious, and certainly I think it's less exploited. But just to go through the list of all the things that I believe the UK offers Israel, and particularly offers Israel in tech. And first of all, we are close. Now that may sound like a statement of the obvious, but if you are a young startup with very limited money, very limited personnel, then the fact that your international partners are just over 4 hours flight away in London or elsewhere in the UK, rather than in Silicon Valley, are 2 hours time difference away, that's actually quite a big deal. And then London is one of the financial capitals of the world. And we have in London billions and billions of pounds sloshing around looking for investments, looking for exciting, high-quality investments. London is an amazing source of capital, and the capital flows between Britain and Israel simply don't reflect the possibilities. We have some extraordinary customers in the UK, and if you're in biomed, then Britain's National Health Service should be one of your 2 or 3 globally most exciting customers. If you crack that, that's an enormous market for you. And then in retail, you've got world-class customers like Tesco's, for example. And across the board, whether it's financial services or retail or biomed or energy or water, Britain has some world-class companies of real size. But it's not just the customers in the UK. It's the global reach that we offer as well. And we offer market access to the whole of Europe. And every country in Europe does that. That's the principle of a single market. But the UK has, I believe, an unparalleled global network, not just into Europe, but into Asia, into Africa, into North and South America. We are a fantastic global hub. If you're an Israeli tech entrepreneur and you've got a fantastic innovation, a fantastic product, you want to take it global, then one of the things that you most need is the professional skill, the skills in marketing, the skills in business development, and all the associated skills that will take your product global. The UK is a fabulous place to find companies and individuals that offer precisely those skills. We have, depending on how you count it, either 3 or 4 of the world's top 10 universities. We've got technological strengths of our own in key areas. So we're not just the source of or a recipient of other people's technological prowess. In important areas, we offer matching tech strengths. And we have an amazing creative sector, probably one of the world's 2 or 3 top creative sectors. So the offer is basically very simple. Israel can help give the UK and British companies a global edge. And in return, the UK can help Israeli innovation go global. Now, so far, that's fine. That seems to work very well. But any ambassador, there are probably 30 ambassadors who would stand up and say very similar things to what I've just said. Everyone wants a tech partnership with the UK, with Israel. I wish everyone wanted one with the UK. So the challenge is really, why is the UK different? How can I stand here and hand on heart tell you that what the UK has to offer you is something unique? And I think the reason is this, that the more we've looked at the potential for the tech partnership between Britain and Israel, the more it's become obvious to us that in individual sectors there are really precisely matching needs, and that there is a complementarity between the UK and Israel that's quite remarkable. So let me give you a few examples. A couple of weeks ago we had our culture minister here. He brought a media delegation with him. Some really important media companies, BBC Worldwide, Condé Nast, a bunch of others. And the underlying proposition of that delegation is this, that the UK produces some of the best content in the world. Israel produces technologies that link content to consumers and helps monetize that content. So you've got a really nice match there between something that Britain has to offer and something that Israel has to offer. And if you can get them together, then that's massively to the benefit of both sides. In finance, I talked about the fact that the UK is a source of capital. There's a lot of money in the UK looking for investments. But there's a particular reason why I think the UK is right for Israel. which is Israeli tech has relied a lot on venture capital funding. But as Israeli companies start to look to grow bigger, then the source of capital and the nature of that capital needs to change away from venture capital for earlier stage companies towards a different sort of capital. And there, the UK's private equity industry is brilliantly placed. Huge amounts of money for it, looking for substantial investments and really interested in any opportunities for exciting deal flow. And so the two are made for each other really extremely well. Give you another example, water. Israel has a number of companies doing really exciting things in water technology. The UK has some of the world-leading water companies, privatized utilities, that are not only interestingly sized, but aggressive globally, looking for technology to give them a global edge. So Yoni took a delegation of Israeli water tech companies to the UK to put the two together. I'll give you one last example. I did a round table in Nazareth a few months ago with some young Arab internet entrepreneurs. And they blew me away. The quality of what they were doing, the innovation of what they were doing is quite outstanding. And I have no doubt that Israel's Arab internet entrepreneurs will, over time, come to take a larger and larger slice of the action in the Arabic-speaking internet. But .il addresses are not brilliant ones from which to conquer the Middle East on the internet. The UK, London, is the perfect place to broadcast to the Arabic-speaking world. It's one of the media capitals of the Arabic-speaking world. And so there's a really fantastic match there as well. So I'm convinced that the underlying proposition is absolutely sound, that we have something we can achieve here that's really very exciting. The question then is, how do you go about doing it? Well, I'll tell you how we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it by putting tens of millions of pounds or dollars or even shkelim into a fund like Bird. I'd love to be able to come up with a huge Bird-type fund, but it's not going to happen. Not with the British government's finances in the state they're in. The British government has just slashed 10% off its budget this financial year, so large sums of money for innovative ventures like this one are going to be hard to come by. Now, part of it is going to be traditional trade promotion and inward investment, the sort of things that Yossi and his team do exceptionally well and have done for a while. But that can't be all of it, because I believe there's another piece, which is why we set up the hub to sit alongside UK trade and investment. And that missing piece is creating a partnership between the two, not necessarily selling things to each other, not necessarily even investing in each other, but forging links between the two. And the example I give is that of Pythagoras Solar. I don't know if any of you know this company. It's a really impressive Israeli startup. And what they do is they produce glass for windows that, as well as being windows, also produces solar energy. Now, that's a fantastic idea. But it doesn't offer a sales opportunity from the UK to Israel. And frankly, given the size of Pythagoras Solar, they're not going to be putting a large investment into the UK anytime soon. But if we can get Pythagoras Solar and a British company to become global partners, then the potential for 5 years or 10 years' time is absolutely enormous. And so I think we need to build a partnership for its own sake, in the knowledge that over time this will pay enormous dividends for both economies. And so we've set up the Technologies Hub, the first of its kind of any embassy in the world, a group of people drawn from the tech and the business sectors, who are tasked with promoting partnerships. And we've been innovative in how we've done it. Unlike most of government, we've gone out and we've appointed a non-executive chairman for the hub, Haim Shani, who used to be chief executive of NICE, was then Director General at the Ministry of Finance. And we are being ruthlessly focused. We are inventing for ourselves a strategy that will select particular sectors. Doing tech in Israel is like being a kid in a candy store. There are so many different sectors that you could choose from. But we can't do that. We've got to focus. And then within the sectors we choose, we have to have specific targets. So much as we would like to help everyone who comes to us, and a lot of people have come to us and said, I've got this great idea for a startup, what can you do for me? It's not going to work like that. In fact, I knew that the message was getting through when I was walking my dog in the park next to our house at about midnight, and a guy ran past me jogging, and then he did another circuit of the park and stopped, and he said, are you the British ambassador? I said, yes. And he said, you're interested in technology, aren't you? And I said, yes. He said, well, I've got a great idea for a startup. And I was really happy about this until I noticed that in the time we were talking, my dog had run away. About an hour later, we found her. So we're going to focus. We're going to have very precise metrics. We're going to approach this in the most strategic way possible. And I'm confident that we are barking up the right tree because we're getting enormous support from government. And we've had a stream of ministers. We had our finance minister, our Chancellor of the Exchequer, come over in the middle of the Eurozone crisis to launch the high-tech hub because he thinks this is important. And we've had a stream of ministers since. But more importantly than that, from my perspective, we've had huge buy-in from the tech sector, from the private sector, because we've seen companies realize that there's something here, that there's something exciting here. And the truth is, governments can do what they want. But unless this is a real opportunity, unless business thinks there's something serious here, then we might as well not bother. We can show an opportunity, but unless the opportunity is real, we'll fail. And so the last thing I'll say is this. To ask the question, if there is a real opportunity here, then why hasn't it happened so far? And why hasn't the market worked? What's gone wrong? And it's an important question because if I'm right that there is an opportunity that's not being exploited, that can only be true if there has been effectively a market failure. And I believe there has. And I believe the reason for this is quite straightforward. That there are lazy stereotypes, there is lazy thinking on both sides of this equation. There are default options that both sides have reverted to for years. That means that this opportunity has just never really been addressed. And so, if you're an Israeli tech entrepreneur, you go to Silicon Valley, because that's where all your friends went, because that's where your investment may come from, because that's where every link and every friend of friend and every precedent is. And going to the UK just feels like a little bit too much of an untravelled path. And Israeli tech entrepreneurs don't think about the UK as an alternative. We're not going to replace the US. We don't seek to replace the US. But there are more places in the world for tech entrepreneurs to go than just one. And on the British side, there are lazy assumptions as well. There are too many British businessmen who, when they think Israel, just remember what they see on the news and think, well, perhaps it's not safe, perhaps it's a war zone, perhaps it's not somewhere where I ought to be doing business. And so there is a lack of imagination. There are stereotypes on both sides that we need to overcome. Now, that's not impossible, because I believe it's replacing false stereotypes with reality. But it's a big task. And there's an awful lot of very, very well-entrenched ideas and prejudices that we're going to need to overcome if we can make this work. You've been exceptionally patient listening to me. I'd be very happy for you to tell me why I'm wrong. I'd be very happy for you to ask me about anything I've said. offer me any ideas for what we're doing, or indeed to ask me about anything else you like, Iran, the BBC, or whatever you like.
I have a question regarding the UK export compliance issues. We've been doing a lot of business in the UK, and in many cases, thank you.
So again, my name is Moti Kaplan from Aerospace Engineering, and the question relates to export compliance issues with the UK government. We've been doing business with the UK for many years, and we found out that the export compliance procedures with the UK government are terribly difficult, sometimes impossible, even compared to the US ITAR, which are known to be very difficult. And as a result, there are many incidents where we turn away from UK partners or suppliers and seek for alternative suppliers in the US or in Europe. So my question is whether there's going to be any relaxation or some more logics into the US government decisions regarding export to Israel.
It's a good question. Shall we have 3 or 4 questions and then I can ignore the ones I don't like?
Hi, I'm Daniel Farb. I'm the CEO of Leviathan Energy. And 2 points. Number one is that it all sounds great, but what actually is the work that's going to be done? Is it going to be limited to contacts? I know Yoni. I know it sounds like he's done a great job already of initiating contacts, but is there going to be something beyond contacts? And for example, you mentioned that they don't have money for something like the Bird Foundation, but what about making the argument to the powers that be that the Bird Foundation has actually been returned a very good ROI on the small amount of money that it, relatively speaking, compared to the amount of economic activity that it stimulated. And I think that that's one issue for every Israeli startup company, is there's a shortage of capital in the country compared to the number of ideas that are here, and that by providing a little bit of capital on the British side, that could help grease the wheels, as it were, so that would you consider adding that to something like that to the mix?
Great. So a third?
Once, going twice.
Okay, well, let me answer those 2 and see if anyone else has one. Export compliance is a good question. The truth is that certain categories of exports to Israel, as indeed certain categories of exports anywhere in the world, are subject to the European Union criteria, common criteria. And this isn't Israel specific, and it's not UK specific. Theoretically, it is exactly the same criteria that each country is judged by, and it's exactly the same criteria that each country applies. But it does lead to a certain amount of angst and concern, and it's something which is often raised with me by Israeli ministers and Israeli security officials in particular. Now, what I can't promise you is that we're going to relax the criteria. These are criteria that have been agreed by the 27 member states of the European Union, and nice though it would be just to change them unilaterally, it's not up to us. What I can say, though, is we are trying very hard to be more transparent and more efficient about it. And so we've agreed, our prime ministers have agreed, for example, that once a year the export licensing team of the Foreign Office is going to come to Israel with people from all the relevant departments and run sessions with people who are affected by these guidelines. And we will listen if you tell us, not that necessarily the substantive decision is the wrong one, that may have more to do with the criteria, but if you tell us the system stinks, then I'm very happy to listen. And if you're saying you're looking elsewhere for business, then obviously that's a real concern. So I'll give you my card afterwards and we can continue the conversation. It's an important conversation. In terms of what we're going to do and are we going to put in money? Look, I mean, the bottom line is if I could go to our finance ministry and guarantee the same ROI for what they put in as Bird produced, then I'm sure they'll throw money at me. But the truth is Bird was pretty unique, or quite, at the very least, quite exceptional. And I have to say the history in the UK of government getting involved in schemes like this is not the fantastic history of Bird and the fantastic ROIs that Bird produced. It's that actually, by and large, government isn't particularly clever at investment. And so you say, oh, well, all we're going to do is provide contacts. Well, I hope it won't just be contacts. I hope what we will do by the way we try and create the partnership that I've talked about is build the whole ecosystem in which the partnerships can flourish. So we don't just look at putting a water tech company together with a big global water company. We also look at getting flows of capital. We also look at provision of business skills. We look at all the things that can make the partnership work. So, I mean, it is ultimately, I guess, all about contacts. It is all about introducing people and showing each other where the opportunities are. But I believe if we do that in a smart, in a strategic way, and we actually think holistically about the whole ecosystem and not just little bits of it, then we can move the needle. The reason I'm so hot on this whole question of a strategy is we can set up endless delegations and events, and we've done lots of delegations already and lots of events, but by themselves, I don't think they're going to make much of a difference. It has to be, our efforts have to be embedded in a strategy that looks right across the partnership and works out how we can actually make some sort of difference rather than just sort of run very fast for running's sake.
My name is Michelle. I'm in the Sofair International MBA program here. And you mentioned stereotypes. How do you suggest or recommend getting rid of or lessening the stereotypes that are very anti-Israel, especially with the media? How do you recommend that that's something that's going to happen?
It's a good question. How long have you got? And there are stereotypes on both sides. It's by no means just one way. And one of the things that drives me nuts here is a stereotype of British universities, where there is a view in Israel that all British universities are hotbeds of anti-Semitism and dangerous places for Jews or Israelis to study, and it's just not true. There are probably 5 or 6 universities where that is true, where you do actually have to be quite ballsy to stand up and defend Israel. But there are 115 universities where actually the students have many bigger concerns than the problems between Israel and the Palestinians. And yet there's a stereotype which has tarred all of British universities, and it's stopping people from going to study from here, from going to study in the UK, and drives me nuts. So, and the first thing to say is the stereotypes are on both sides. The second thing to say is I'm not sure actually that the underlying premise of your question, that there is a sort of huge hostility towards Israel in the UK, is right. And I mean, I have to say, I spend a lot of time going through opinion polls with opinion pollsters in the UK. And it's just not the case that the UK is an anti-Israeli country. It's certainly not the case that the UK is an anti-Semitic country. I mean, report after report, survey after survey, puts the UK as the least anti-Semitic country across Europe. And so, and I think then you need, I mean, the question is a fair one, but you need not to be too defensive. You need not to start from the basis that everyone in the UK hates you. or hates Israel. And there's an important point here, which is there's a lot of talk about boycotts. There's a lot of talk about boycotts of Israel in the UK. Now, it's true, there are a small number of people in the UK who make a lot of noise. But their impact is very small. Last year, we've just announced, Yossi and I have just announced the trade figures between the UK and Israel. Last year, trade was up on the year before by 34%. In a single year. That's an enormous increase. That's an increase that would make any ambassador happy in the best of economic times. But given that these are far from the best of economic times, then I think that those trade figures speak volumes about a willingness to do business. And the truth is the boycotts, the people behind the boycotts, are a fringe element. And, I mean, this is veering into politics rather than economics, but let me say this, that I worry that Israel and Israel's friends around the world and diaspora communities like the one I came from play into the hands of the boycott merchants by giving them huge publicity, by every time some tiny organisation in the UK passes a motion that will have no impact at all on the real world, it's huge news. And that's playing straight into their hands. I always use the example of West Dunbartonshire District Council in Scotland. Has anyone here been to West Dunbartonshire, just out of interest? Excellent, there's one. Now, the two, leave it there, or you'll ruin the point I'm trying to make. This is a district council that passed a motion calling for an economic boycott of Israel. Now, the net economic impact of that motion is not enormous. You're not talking about the whole of Britain, you're not talking about the whole of Scotland, you're not even talking about the whole of Dunbartonshire. You're talking about West Dunbartonshire. And yet, it was enormous news. And so I worry that there is a nervousness or a defensiveness that is the wrong approach. I think Israel can be more confident than that. It's not to say that there aren't issues, but on the issues, I believe, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, the problem is the problem. That there is a concern that Israel should have about the degree of sympathy towards Israel, not on the fringe, but in the centre ground. But on that, I believe there's no amount of hasbara and there's no amount of shouting about media bias or anything else that's going to resolve that. That is a slow sapping of goodwill, which is simply, and I believe almost inevitably, a result of the fact that the peace process is totally stuck. And so I believe the thing that will unstick the PR problem is unsticking the peace process. So have I talked you all into submission, please? Yeah, you have to use it.
Have to use it. David Cohen, from Cohen Corporate Finance. How do you propose, or how do you envisage that capital from the UK is going to flow into Israeli technology? I've been involved for 17 years in Israel-British high-tech initiatives, and we've had a lot of investment from the States and a lot of interaction with the States. With Britain, there have been initiatives in the past, but they haven't really taken the relationship to where it should be in terms of capital flows from the UK and the UK capital markets into Israel. So given that this is your brief in the Tech Hub, how is it going to happen in your eyes?
It's a good question, and it is true that there have been failures so far. This has been tried before, not just by Britain, but including by Britain, and it hasn't worked. And there have been some false starts. And I think there is a particular issue to do with Israeli companies on AIM in the UK, where a number of Israeli companies at a time when the AIM was basically not looking too hard at the companies that were being listed on it, came along, and way too many of those companies no longer exist, and there is bad feeling on both sides as a result of what was frankly a rather unhappy experience, an unhappy chapter in capital flows between the two countries. And so one of the things we have to get over is the fact that when you mention tech, Israeli tech in the City of London, there's a generation that roll their eyes because they had unhappy, not happy experiences. So the question is what you do about it. Now, the first thing is it is no coincidence that the chairman of the hub that I've appointed was just stepped down as Director General of the Ministry of Finance. The director of the hub has experience in an investment bank, because I believe that the capital flows are absolutely key to making this work. Secondly, then, come on to your question, how do you make it work? Well, I think what we have to do is try and be smart about it and target precisely the right people who we believe might be interested in seeing what Israel has to offer. And we've started that process. We've started conversations with the key people in some of the most important investment banks in London. We've started the process of talking to the private equity sector. And, I mean, it's really interesting because I'm absolutely convinced if we were trying to persuade British venture capital to come to Israel, we'd fail. Because British venture capital is not looking for deal flow at the moment. It's looking to raise money. It's looking for better returns. It's not looking for lots of new and exciting opportunities. Private equity is different. Private equity is absolutely cash rich at the moment and is seriously interested in any market that might be able to offer exciting deal flow. And so when I've sat down with some sort of key people in the industry and I've talked about the opportunities here, but also talked about how we can serve up those opportunities on a plate. We can make it very easy for them by working with VCs and other organizations here to pre-sift so that they can come along and have an intensive few days of looking at the possibilities. There's a lot of interest. Now, we'll see whether it works. You're right to be skeptical. I'm not standing here guaranteeing that all this is going to come good, and certainly not guaranteeing it's going to come good quickly. I'm absolutely convinced that we'll have numerous false starts, we'll go up numerous blind alleys, but we've got to try, and I do think that getting the capital flow right is going to be right at the heart of making it work.
I'd just like to make a suggestion about one of...
You need to use the microphone.
Here we go. When you're talking about capital flows and how to do it right, I'll just mention that one of my experiences is that I found a British venture capital firm that was interested in investing in one of my companies, but they insisted that there be an Israeli venture capital firm that go along with them. And that's where things fell apart, perhaps because the Israelis side there's really nobody in Israel in venture capital that had experience in hydroelectric power. So I think that that's one of the attitude changes that needs to occur, that you have to have a local manager as well. And that can sometimes, even when there is interest from the British side, ruin a deal.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, there are all sorts of barriers that I think we need to address, both governmental and in the private sector. Some of them we'll be able to address. I mean, one of the things we're looking at is, for example, a UK-Israel treaty to cover this that might provide a better framework, for example, for entrepreneur visas or taxation on IP flow between the two countries or things like that. So, I mean, we're looking to identify the problems and resolve them. Some of them we'll be able to, particularly if they're governmental. Others we won't. We'll be able to flag them up, but we won't be able to tell people to do business differently. But it's a good point and well taken.
Samuel Cohen. Matthew, the issue is not just what you were saying about getting private equity and getting the investment bankers, but it's getting their attention to the supply of opportunities here. And the biggest problem I've found, and I don't want to spend time talking about what I found, is that the opportunities that emanate from Israel are very rarely matching the demand for opportunities, interest in deals. At the top end, I quite agree. I mean, we've seen Apex, we've seen them come in with money from the UK and so forth into the larger deals. But when you come down below the medium-sized transactions vis-à-vis Israel, and most transactions at the tech area are in the lower end and below the scale at which the private equity, certainly, forget the VC funds and the investment bankers, there just isn't money in it for them given what their whole business model is. And that is where I think we need to pay attention to. And I'd welcome your views on that.
It's a good point. Now, I hope you won't mind if I make this the last question, because if I leave soon after, I can go home and put my Sabra daughter to bed. Look, I mean, you may be right. It may be that actually this is a mirage, and the complementarity that I'm seeing isn't actually there. We'll see. We'll test it. But we will do everything we can to test it effectively, to set ourselves targets, to go all out to achieve those targets, and then if we don't achieve them, we'll know that it was wrong, that the underlying proposition wasn't to be. But, I mean, there are tools at our disposal to come up with the strategy, to come up with the metrics, and then to drive the strategy that are potentially quite powerful. So, for example, and we will have a constant flow of ministers, including very senior ministers, coming to Israel, leading delegations. And so there may be people in the UK financial sector who might not come to Israel if I write to them, but if the Chancellor of the Exchequer writes to them and says, I'm leading a delegation, think you should be on it, we'll make very sure they're on it. And so it's just a small example, but the bottom line is you may be right. Let's see. Let's give it our best shot. And if in 2 years' time you invite me back and I'll say, you know what, the whole thing was rubbish, there was nothing in it, we set our metrics, we set our strategy, nothing happened, then look, we'll have given it a try, and it has to be worth testing.
Well, first of all, I appreciate you coming here, and I more even appreciate your vision and thought. We promised to invite you in a couple of years. You just told me during the reception that you have 2.5 more years. So it will be exactly in the framework where you can come here and tell us about your vision of 2012, how it came true in 2014. Hopefully we'll all be well by then. And we're very much thankful for your coming here, and thank you all coming and listening to the ambassador. Have a good evening.